Have you ever watched someone put their life on the line for this country only to be treated like a criminal just because of the color of their skin? Hey there. I hope you and your family are doing well today. Life's been a little heavy lately, hasn't it? But I pray you're staying strong, staying grounded, and holding your loved ones close. Now let me tell you something that might shake you to your core. Picture this: a decorated black woman is a United States Army general standing on a sidewalk handcuffed like some low-level thug. Her teenage daughter screaming, bystanders filming, the police saying she fit the description. That woman wasn't just any general. She had a past not even the president knew in full. Because before the stars on her shoulder, she served this country in silence as one of the top agents in the CIA, risking her life in places we can't even pronounce. But none of that mattered to the white cop who slammed her onto the hood of her own car. Until the Secretary of Defense made a call that shook the courtroom and the truth came roaring out. Buckle up, because what you're about to hear, it's more than a story. It's a wake-up call. Her name was Major General Lila Freeman, though. To most folks back home in Augusta, Georgia, she was just Lila Mae Miss Freeman's baby girl from the east side of town. Born in 1968, right in the thick of a changing America, Lila came into the world with 2 strikes against her. She was black and she was female. But her mama used to say, God don't make no weak women. And he sure didn't start with you. Lila believed her. She was raised in a 2-bedroom house with a rusted tin roof right across from a Baptist church, where Sunday mornings meant tight hats and gospel that rolled through the windows like thunder. Her mother, Loretta Freeman, worked the nights at the VA hospital cleaning surgical floors. Her daddy long gone by the time Lila turned 7. Folks said he had the devil's charm and the bottle's grip. Lila never knew much more than that, and she didn't care to. What she did know was this: she wasn't going to die broken and visible in that neighborhood. By the time she was 16, Lila had memorized the ROTC creed, knew how to break down an M16 faster than most boys, and could outmarch anybody at Fort Gordon. She graduated top of her class, skipped parties for push-ups, and turned down prom for basic training. The Army was her way out, and she made damn sure she earned every inch of it. By the early 2000s, Lila wasn't just in uniform. She was leading black ops in Afghanistan, briefing generals twice her age, and learning languages most Americans had never heard of. But behind the bars on her collar and the salute in her walk, there was another side of her story, one that only a handful of people in the Pentagon knew. Lila Freeman had once worked undercover for the Central Intelligence Agency. Not as a desk agent, not a codebreaker behind glass. No, Lila was the one in the field in the fire, taking down armed smugglers and war criminals, blending in behind enemy lines. She did things she couldn't talk about, made decisions that still kept her up at night. And when the CIA offered her a permanent post, she walked away. Too many secrets, she said once. I serve better when I'm in uniform and in the light. But those years never left her. They changed the way she looked at people, changed what she saw when someone stood too close or too quiet. Fast forward to spring 2023, Lila had returned to Georgia on a brief assignment, visiting local high schools and military prep programs to recruit more diverse candidates into Army leadership roles. She wasn't in camo, no combat boots or bars showing, just jeans, a white blouse, a gray blazer, and a daughter beside her, Naomi, 17, sweet-tempered but smart as a whip. Lila had raised her alone, same way her mama had done. That morning, they'd stopped at a local bagel shop Lila had gone to for years when visiting the area. It was a sleepy Wednesday. Spring pollen in the air. Naomi was giggling over something on her phone. Lila was reading an email from the Pentagon about a personnel shuffle. They walked out toward their car, coffees in hand. And that's when everything shifted. The police cruiser rolled up without a siren. 2 officers stepped out. One tall mid-40s white male, the other younger, stockier, also white. No greeting. No smile. Just stern voices and hard stares. Ma'am, we need you to stop right there. Lila, calm as ever, turned and said, Something wrong, officer? You fit the description, the older one said. We're looking for a black female suspect involved in a vehicle break-in nearby. Lila raised an eyebrow. I'm a U.S. Army Major General. I just picked up a bagel with my daughter. We haven't even been near any other vehicles. The younger cop motioned to his partner. She's being difficult. Before Lila could speak again, she felt a cold grip on her wrist. Her phone fell. Naomi screamed. Lila was spun, pushed forward against the hood of her car. Handcuffs snapped around her wrist like wolves' jaws. Hey, she yelled. I am a U.S. Army officer. Get your hands off me. The older cop chuckled. And I'm the Pope. Naomi was crying now, fumbling to pick up her mother's phone. Lila was face down on the hot metal heart-pounding knot out of fear, but pure rage. You see, this wasn't Lila's first run-in with racism, but this moment was different. She had led soldiers into Taliban territory. She had sat across from men with blood on their hands and never blinked. But now, right here in the country, she swore to defend a pair of patrol cops who were treating her like she was nothing. And she knew deep down that if her daughter hadn't been there, if no one had filmed it on their phones, she might have ended up face down in the dirt, not just handcuffed. They ran her ID. One officer went back to the cruiser, radioed something in. The other stood over her, arms crossed. So what kind of general are you, weekend reserve? Lila turned her head just slightly. I'm the kind of general who has more medals than you have years on this force. He sneered. Yeah, well, out here that don't mean jack. And that's when the call came in from Washington, D.C. A call that would flip the whole damn day upside down. That's the backdrop. A black woman, a mother, a war hero reduced to fitting the description. But Lila Freeman's story, it was just heating up. Back at the patrol car, Officer Ricks was staring at his screen, brow furrowed. Tom, he called out to his partner. You might want to look at this. Sergeant Tom Wilkins walked over, still half laughing, as he tossed Lila's ID back on the cruiser's dashboard. What now? Ricks turned the screen so his partner could read the incoming dispatch. Hold do not process defense. Dep confirms. Individual is active duty. Major General Freeman. Pentagon contact incoming. Wilkins muttered under his breath. Shit. Lila, still pinned against the car, gave them both a look so sharp it could have sliced metal. Told you, she said calmly. Now uncuff me before you make a bigger mistake. But Wilkins didn't move right away. That ego he just couldn't let go. He stepped closer to Lila's face and said, You might have some stripes, lady, but around here we don't bow down to titles. Lila's daughter Naomi was standing just feet away, still shaking and crying. Is she under arrest or not? You can't just throw people around like that. That's when a third voice broke in. This is Assistant Deputy Jordan, Department of Defense. Put her on the line now. Ricks fumbled with the phone. Wilkins hesitated, still gripping his pride like a loaded weapon. Lila, meanwhile, stood tall now that her cuffs were off, brushing off her blazer with ice-cold poise. Yeah, it's me, she said into the phone. Freeman. 10 minutes later, a black SUV with government plates pulled into the parking lot. Out stepped a federal liaison officer, flanked by two men in suits. One of them handed Wilkins a folder. You're done here, he said flatly. Step away from General Freeman. Wilkins turned red but said nothing. Now let me ask you something, friend. Have you ever watched someone double down on their mistake? Not because they're right, but because they can't stand to be proven wrong by a black woman. If you have, drop a comment below. We're not alone in that. Back in the SUV, Lila rode in silence. Naomi sat beside her, still stunned. Why didn't you tell them who you were right away? Naomi finally asked. Lila sighed. I shouldn't have to. That's the point. Naomi looked at her, a new kind of understanding forming in her eyes. Her mom wasn't just tough. She was tired of the burden of always having to prove herself in a country she'd served with everything she had. They were driven to a private federal building just outside Fort Gordon. Waiting there was someone Lila hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. Judge Nathaniel Harlan, now a federal circuit judge. Back in the early 2000s, he'd overseen secret military tribunals involving classified CIA operations, Lila's operations. He stood, shook her hand slowly. General Freeman, I'll be honest, I never thought I'd see your name pop up like this. She nodded. I didn't expect to end up in cuffs outside a bagel shop either. He gestured for her to sit. We've got a situation. That Officer Wilkinson's been on our radar before. 2 complaints of racial profiling, both quietly dismissed by the local PD. This time there's video, multiple witnesses, and the Pentagon is furious. Lila folded her arms. They should be. What do you want to do? Harlan asked. She looked at him square in the eye. I want accountability. I want this to be public. And I want my daughter to see that you don't get to walk away from this kind of hate just because you're wearing a badge. But the resistance came quickly. Within 48 hours, right-wing media outlets started spinning the story. General Freeman overreacts to standard police check. Black military officer plays race card, demands special treatment. They called her arrogant, called her a troublemaker, called her ungrateful. Someone even leaked her CIA background, violating her decades of silence and service. And still through all that noise, Lila didn't flinch, because she knew exactly who she was and what she had survived to become her. Let me pause right here and speak directly to you. If this had happened to your daughter, your sister, your mother, what would you have done? Would you have kept quiet or stood up and raised hell? Tell me in the comments, because this isn't just a story, it's a mirror. Back at her home in Augusta, Loretta Freeman, Lila's mother, sat in her recliner watching the news with tears rolling down her cheeks. Not tears of shame, tears of fury. They think they can do anything to us and walk away clean, she whispered. Not this time. And she was right. Because what came next was going to flip the entire system on its back. 3 days after the incident, Major General Lila Freeman stood in full dress uniform before a packed press room inside the Pentagon. Medals across her chest, shoulders square, her voice calm but unmistakably firm. I've served this country from the sands of Iraq to the mountains of Afghanistan. I've worn this uniform for over 25 years. But last week, on American soil in my own hometown, I was treated like a criminal because I'm black. Not because I broke a law. Not because I was armed. But because 2 police officers saw my skin before they saw my humanity. She paused and let the silence land hard. Naomi sat in the front row, phone in hand, live streaming every second. Lila continued, "This isn't just about me. It's about every black mother who has to teach her child how to survive a traffic stop, every black veteran who fought for freedom overseas, only to come home and be treated like a threat." It was the most watched moment on cable news that week. And it set off a storm. The Secretary of Defense, who had quietly called Judge Harlan just hours after Lila's arrest, now came forward publicly. In a formal statement, he said, "Major General Freeman has served this nation with honor at the highest levels of intelligence and military strategy. Her detention was not only unwarranted, it was disgraceful. We are cooperating with the Department of Justice to ensure full accountability." That same day, the mayor of Augusta ordered an independent investigation into Officers Wilkins and Ricks. Civil rights attorneys began circling. National organizations reached out to Lila to offer support, in AACP, ACLU, even a few retired generals who had been quietly watching from the sidelines. But not everyone welcomed the spotlight. Inside the local police union, some officers were fuming. They said she was making them look bad, putting a target on their backs. An anonymous memo circulated the department with a photo of Lila Freeman in cuffs captioned, "No one's above the law, even generals." That's when the real threats started. Calls to her house, emails filled with slurs, a note left on her car window one morning that read, "Watch your back, soldier, you made enemies." Still, Lila didn't back down. Instead, she filed a federal civil rights lawsuit, not just against the 2 officers, but the entire department. And she did it not for money, but for change. The goal: mandatory racial bias training, an independent civilian oversight board, and a public admission of wrongdoing. She told her legal team, "I'm not looking for a check. I'm looking for truth on paper and in policy." Meanwhile, the leaked intel about her CIA background was creating its own ripple. Reporters started digging. They found fragments, mentions of her role in an operation that dismantled a child trafficking ring in West Africa, a classified mission that intercepted Russian arms dealers in Syria, a suspected link to an old op in Venezuela that saved 3 kidnapped journalists. The media started using a new name for her, the Ghost General. It stuck. Lila hated the attention, but she also knew the tide had turned. Her silence had once been her power. Now her story was. At Naomi's high school, things shifted too. A week earlier, some students had teased her, "Your mom got arrested like a shoplifter." Now they were looking at her like she was untouchable. Teachers asked her to speak in civics class. One of them whispered, "Your mom's a damn hero." Naomi didn't smile, she just said she always was. Y'all just noticed. And while the media storm continued, one moment stood out. A video clip just 14 seconds long went viral. It showed Lila outside the courthouse being asked by a reporter, "General Freeman, do you believe in forgiveness?" She paused, then said, "I believe in justice first. Forgiveness comes later." That line was quoted in articles on shirts, in sermons from Chicago to Charleston. Even Whoopi Goldberg said it live on The View. But the most powerful moment came 1 week later during a town hall meeting in Augusta. Lila stood before hundreds of people, mostly black, but not all, and said, "We are not asking for favors. We are demanding recognition of our dignity, of our sacrifice, of our right to live without fear in the country we built." The room stood up, clapping, shouting. Naomi cried openly for the first time. And somewhere in the back, Officer Rick sat slumped in his seat, eyes hollow. His partner, Tom Wilkins, never showed. This was the turning point. Not just in the case, but in the city. Black veterans began organizing, churches held voter drives. Local TV ran nightly segments on police reform, and every time someone tried to change the subject, someone else said, "Yeah, but what happened to General Freeman?" Because once you've seen truth, you can't unsee it. The courtroom was packed. June 17th, 2023, exactly 60 days after the arrest, and the city of Augusta was holding its breath. Every local news crew had set up outside, cable networks were streaming live, activists, veterans, school teachers, pastors, they were all there. And so was Major General Lila Freeman in full uniform with her daughter Naomi beside her. Her attorney had made it clear this wasn't just about her rights being violated. This was about systemic racism, plain and simple. But there was one twist no one expected. The Department of Justice, under pressure from veterans organizations and public demand, had decided to bring federal charges against Officer Tom Wilkins for civil rights violations under color of law. It was rare, almost unheard of, but it was happening. The judge, an older black man named Judge Wallace Gaines, known for his non-nonsense tone and deep sense of justice, entered the room, glasses low on his nose. He looked around and said plainly, "This court recognizes Major General Lila Freeman for her service, but more importantly for her courage to hold this system accountable. Let's begin." Wilkins sat across the room, face stiff, his lawyer whispering behind folded papers. When asked why he had handcuffed a woman without evidence, Wilkins answered with a shrug. She fit the description. "I feared for my safety." Lila's lawyer stood stone calm. "You feared for your safety. From an unarmed woman in a blouse and flats standing with her teenage daughter. You feared a woman who held top-level clearance with the CIA, who holds more military rank than most officers ever will." The jury shifted uncomfortably. The prosecutor added, "You feared her because she was Black Sergeant. That's the truth." Then it was Lila's turn to speak. She stepped up to the stand. No notes, no flash, just presence. "I've been in combat zones. I've led teams into caves in the dead of night, taken fire-patched wounds, held dying men in my arms. I've done it all without hesitation. For this country." She looked straight at Wilkins. "But nothing in my life has ever made me feel more powerless than that moment you put cuffs on me in front of my child." She paused. Naomi looked down, hands folded in her lap. "You didn't see a soldier, you didn't see a mother, you saw a black woman, and to you that was threat enough. Now let me ask you something, friend. Have you ever been judged by the way you look before you even opened your mouth? Have you ever had someone decide who you were before they heard your story? Tell me in the comments. Because if we don't speak up now, it'll keep happening." Back in court, Wilkins didn't respond. He just sat there, shoulders sunken, jaw tight. The judge leaned forward. Sergeant Wilkins, this court finds that your actions were not only unprofessional but unconstitutional. You violated Major General Freeman's civil rights and in doing so undermined the very justice you were sworn to uphold. The courtroom fell silent. Then came the sentence. You are hereby stripped of your badge, fined, and sentenced to 1 year of supervised probation, plus mandatory civil rights training and public apology. It wasn't prison. Lila hadn't asked for that. She wanted justice, not revenge. Wilkins didn't look at her when he walked out. He didn't speak, but his silence said everything. Outside, a crowd had gathered, not to riot, but to listen. Lila stepped up to the microphones, Naomi clutching her hand. She didn't read a speech. She didn't shout. She simply said, "No uniform should protect a man from justice. But mine almost wasn't enough to protect me from injustice." And with that, she turned and walked away. Later that evening, Naomi posted a photo online. Her mother standing tall at sunset saluting the flag. She captioned it, "Not all heroes wear capes. Mine wears stars." It got over 1 million likes in 2 days. This wasn't just a climax in court, it was a climax in the public conscience. People were talking, marching, writing letters, donating to legal funds, pushing for reform in towns where Lila's name was now a rallying cry. Because in that one moment, everyone saw clearly. This country still breaks its best and brightest, but it can be held accountable. 2 weeks after the verdict, Lila Freeman finally sat still. No press, no courtrooms, no marching, just a porch swing, a glass of sweet tea, and a Georgia sunset slipping behind her mama's pecan trees. She exhaled deeply for the first time in months. Inside, Naomi and Loretta were finishing dinner. The smell of fried catfish and collard greens drifted through the screen door. A Marvin Gaye record played faintly in the background. This was home. But it wasn't the same home it had been before. The city of Augusta had changed. Following the trial, 3 more residents came forward with claims of racial profiling from officers Wilkins and Ricks. The Department of Justice expanded its investigation, and within a month, the local police department announced a complete revamp of its training programs. They brought in civil rights educators, Black veterans, and community leaders, including Lila herself, to rebuild the culture of policing from the ground up. Mayor Thompson even offered her a seat on the new Civilian Oversight Board. At first, she declined. "I've fought enough battles for this country," she told him. But after a long talk with Naomi, she reconsidered. "If you leave the room," Naomi said, "they'll fill it with people who've never lived what you lived." So she took the seat, and she made sure it wasn't just symbolic. One night at a local town hall, a young Black man stood up nervously during Q&A and asked her, "General Freeman, ma'am, how do you keep going when it feels like the world don't want us here?" She looked him straight in the eyes. "You stand anyway," she said, "because they don't get to decide our worth. And they damn sure don't get the last word." The room erupted into applause. Meanwhile, Naomi was changing too. She'd started journaling after the arrest at first, just to cope then as a way to document everything she saw, everything she felt. One of her entries ended up published in a national youth magazine, then a second in Teen Vogue. Before long, she was speaking at school assemblies about racial justice and trauma. She wasn't just Lila Freeman's daughter anymore. She was finding her own voice and using it. As for Lila, she didn't return to the Pentagon. Instead, she retired early from the Army quietly with honors. Her service ceremony was intimate close friends, colleagues, a few generals, and more than a few tears. The Secretary of Defense attended personally and handed her the flag folded crisp in his hands. "You gave everything, General Freeman," he said. "We failed you, but you never failed us." She nodded, but her answer was simple. "Then make sure this never happens to another one of us." After retirement, she founded a small nonprofit called STARS in the Darken organization, supporting Black veterans, especially women, as they transitioned from service back into civilian life. Mentorship, legal support counseling. No cameras, no politics. Just help. One of her first clients was a young Black woman dishonorably discharged after being wrongly accused of insubordination. Lila fought her case personally and got her record cleared within 6 months. "She reminded me of myself," Lila said, "but at 19, Before the stars, before the silence, before the scars. Every now and then, the press would reach out. Would you be open to a memoir? Could we do a documentary? Netflix is interested. How about a mini-series? She always gave the same answer, maybe, but not yet. Because this story, her story wasn't finished. It wasn't just hers, anyway. It belonged to every black soldier who'd ever been doubted. Every mother handcuffed for standing tall. Every daughter who watched it happen and still chose to rise. One warm Sunday morning, Loretta Freeman looked out from her kitchen window and smiled. Her daughter was back in that same old porch swing boots off Naomi beside her, with a paperback copy of Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Birds chirped, sun spilled across the grass, and peace finally hung in the air like a quilt. You did good, baby, Loretta whispered to herself. Real good. And maybe that's what justice looks like in the end. Not a courtroom, not a headline, but a swing and creaking slowly in the Georgia sun and the sound of your child laughing free. The story of Major General Lila Freeman didn't fade with the news cycle. It settled deeper into classrooms, police academies, veterans halls, and kitchen table conversations across the country. Her name became a case study, a conversation starter, a warning, a rally cry. In colleges, criminal justice professors began their lectures by saying, before we get into policing theory today, let's talk about Augusta 2023. At military bases, junior officers were assigned to read a memo titled, When Leadership Meets Injustice, the Freeman Case. Even in churches, black churches especially, pastors said her name from the pulpit. They tried to shackle her like a criminal, but God lifted her like a prophet. The Stars in the Dark nonprofit grew faster than anyone expected. Within a year, it had offices in Atlanta, Baltimore, and Houston, not because Lila sought expansion, but because the need was that deep. Veterans showed up with stories they'd carried for years. One woman said, I was told to keep quiet. You told me I didn't have to. Young soldiers reached out on Instagram and said, I didn't think people like us could make it all the way to general until I saw you. And Lila answered every message herself. Meanwhile, Naomi started college at Howard University, majoring in political science with a minor in journalism. She walked onto that campus not as a legacy student, but as the daughter of a movement. One professor asked her to give a guest lecture during Black History Month. She started with a photo of her mother in handcuffs on the sidewalk. Then she clicked to the next slide, her mother standing in front of the Pentagon in full uniform. Same woman, same courage, one seen as a threat, one seen as a hero. And the only thing that changed was the world watching. The room gave her a standing ovation. And that was the thing the world was watching. The Freeman case sparked a federal grant program aimed at retraining local police departments across the country in racial sensitivity and use of force de-escalation. It wasn't perfect. Not everyone welcomed it. But when funding was tied to reform, cities listened. One small-town mayor in Alabama said, I may not agree with all that Freeman woman said, but we can't afford another Augusta on our hands. Even the White House invited Lila to attend a Veterans and Civil Rights Leadership Roundtable. She politely declined. I'm not here to pose for photos. I'm here to build something real. Then came the letters. Hundreds of them, from young girls, from elderly veterans, from single mothers, from police officers who said I didn't get until your story hit me right between the eyes. One former cop from Missouri wrote, I was Officer Wilkins 10 years ago. Arrogant, afraid, racist without even knowing it. But your story shook me. I've spent every day since trying to be better. Lila never responded with judgment. She always said the same thing. It's not too late to do right. 2 years later, in 2025, the city of Augusta unveiled a bronze plaque outside the courthouse where the verdict was read. It reads, in honor of Major General Lila Freeman, whose courage reminded us that justice delayed is still worth fighting for. She didn't attend the ceremony. She watched from the hill nearby, Naomi beside her. You think they'll forget, Naomi asked. Lila shook her head. Not if we keep reminding them. And we did. The story lived on in podcasts, school plays, community discussions, not as a tragedy, but as a call to vigilance. It reminded America that a decorated general could still be handcuffed for looking like a suspect. And that courage sometimes looks like refusing to stay quiet in a world that would rather you disappear. Lila Freeman's case didn't end racism. It didn't fix the justice system overnight, but it forced people to see what they didn't want to see. It made them ask hard questions. And most of all, it made it harder for the next Officer Wilkins to say, "I didn't know." Because now they do. So now that you've heard her story, let me ask you something real straight. What do we owe the people who serve this country not just with bullets and boots, but with dignity? What do we owe the women who rise through systems that were never built for them? The mothers who raise children while dodging bullets, both in war zones and on American sidewalks? What do we owe to a woman like Major General Lila Freeman? Because here's the truth, and I want you to hold this close. Lila's story isn't just about one woman in uniform. It's about every Black woman who's ever had to smile while swallowing rage. Every one of us who's been told to calm down, back up, sit pretty, stay quiet. It's about what happens when we don't. When we speak, when we fight, when we stand even when the world expects us to fold. And if you're sitting there thinking, this is powerful, but what can I do? Let me tell you. First, don't scroll past this. Reflect. Think about who gets handcuffed and who gets protected. Ask why. Second, speak up. In your communities, your churches, your workplaces, these stories can't live and die on social media. They have to be told again and again. Third, support the people doing the work. Not just the famous ones, the teachers, the veterans, the mamas working 3 jobs to keep a light on in the dark. And finally, like this story, share it. Talk about it. Comment below. How did this story make you feel? What part hit home for you? Subscribe to our channel, Black Women, because these stories were just getting started. Lila Freeman stood tall for all of us. Now it's our turn to stand up beside her. Because silence doesn't protect. Silence only prolongs the lie. But truth liberates. Truth uplifts. And truth, especially when spoken by a Black woman, changes everything. Thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling this with us. And thank you most of all for not turning away. See you in the comments. From all of us at Black Women with Love and Power,